Good afternoon. He's Frank.
And he's Abe. And today, we're adumbrating the second half of Chapter 23, Political Paralysis in the Gilded Age, in Kennedy, Cohen, and Bailey's The American Pageant textbook. Abe, start us off.
All right. Hayes was denounced by his own Republican Party, and so James A. Garfield was nominated with Chester Arthur as his vice presidential running partner. Garfield waved the bloody shirt, as Grant had done, and won the 1880 election over the Democrat Winfield Scott Hancock. Garfield's presidency was overall disappointing. Immediately, a conflict arose between James Blaine and Roscoe Conkling, and Garfield was quickly murdered by Charles J. Guiteau, who was seeking a government job. Guiteau pleaded insanity, but was still found guilty and hanged. Overall, there was a positive outcome from Garfield's death. Politicians felt compelled to reform the spoils system. So, the Republicans passed the Pendleton Act, which 1. rendered compulsory campaign contributions from government employees illegal, and 2. established the Civil Service Commission to appoint federal jobs based on merit rather than bribery. Basically, politicians now had to obtain campaign funds elsewhere. So they turned to large corporations and formed marriages of convenience with these large corporations. Now, Frank, could you tell me more about the conflict between Blaine and Conkling?
Absolutely. When the election of 1884 rolled around, the Republicans chose Blaine. Now, this caused some to peel off from the main party and join the Democrats, and they were known as mugwumps. The Democrats, however, chose Grover Cleveland because he was promising reform. As the campaign intensified, both sides began slinging mud. Blaine was accused of making corrupt deals with the railroad company, proved in the infamous Mulligan letters, one of which ended with the famous words, "Burn this letter." Meanwhile, Cleveland was found to have an illegitimate son, and he was ridiculed for that. The race was close, and in the end, it revolved on New York. Since a foolish Republican had poked fun at the Irish's patriotism and race, they voted for the Democrats, resulting in a Cleveland victory. Abe, now that Cleveland's in the Oval Office, what were his policies?
Okay. In 1885, old Grover Cleveland was the first Democrat to become president since Buchanan in 1857. So, Cleveland strongly advocated the doctrine of laissez-faire, or avoiding government intervention. Therefore, bankers and business people alike were very content with Cleveland's election. Cleveland helped to unite the North and South by appointing 2 former Confederates to his cabinet. Although Cleveland at first favored the reforms and advocated for the merit system, he soon fired 120,000 government employees to make room for the supposed deserving Democrats. During Cleveland's presidency, the Grand Army of the Republic, or the GAR, forced hundreds of scandalous pension bills through Congress. Cleveland stood firm, however, and vetoed several hundred of these bills. Now, Frank, what was Cleveland's opinion on the tariff?
Well, as the 1881 rolled around, the federal government had a $145 million surplus stored up, which they decided meant the tariff should be lowered since the government was simply making too much money. The more Cleveland read on the topic, the more he agreed. In 1887, he called upon Congress to lower the tariff. Now, for the first time in years, the Republicans and Democrats found themselves divided over a real issue, even as the next election approached. The next year, the Democrats nominated Cleveland against the Republicans' Benjamin Harrison. Backed by over $3 million coming from corporations who wanted the tariffs to stay high, and through the use of open bribery, Harrison squeaked by and won the election. Abe, at this time, who was in charge of the House of Representatives?
Thomas B. Reed, famous for his caustic sarcasm, became the new Republican Speaker of the House. Manipulating the roll call, Reed marked present many Democrats who had not actually answered the roll call. Therefore, Reed dominated the first ever billion-dollar Congress. This Congress passed the Mckinley Tariff Act in order to maintain its revenues. Essentially, the act increased the tax to about 48.4%, the highest ever in history. Farmers were outraged since they now had to purchase their manufactured goods at ridiculous prices. Because of this, the Republicans lost their majority in Congress. Now, Frank, how did this political discontent manifest itself?
Well, growing political discontent led to the rise of the Populist Party in 1892, and it was formed mostly by the farmers that you were talking about. They wanted inflation, since it would reduce their debts. They also advocated for an income tax, shorter workday, and limited immigration. The calls for better workplace conditions reached a boiling point later that year during the Homestead Strike, in which striking steelworkers from Andrew Carnegie's company faced off against 300 private Pinkerton detectives. At the end of the strike, 80 people lay dead or wounded. In the South, problems were even worse. Blacks were being targeted even more by Jim Crow laws, including the infamous grandfather clause, which stated you could only vote if your grandfather had voted in 1860, which was before blacks even had the right to vote, making it fundamentally racist and segregationist against black voters in the South. Abe, I bet all this corruption and all these panics made the American people real depressed, didn't it?
Actually, yes. In 1893, Cleveland once again took office and had to deal with the Depression of 1893, which resulted from 1. Overbuilding, 2. Overspeculation, 3. Agricultural depression, 4. Labor disorders, and 5. Free silver agitation, which damaged American credit internationally. Although the Treasury was formerly in surplus with the billion-dollar Congress, Cleveland now faced deficit. The Treasury had to issue legal notes for all the silver bullion it purchased. These notes would then be traded for gold, thus draining the Treasury's gold supply in an endless chain process. The gold reserve dropped below 100 million, and so Cleveland repealed the Sherman Silver Purchase Act of 1890. Congressman William Jennings Bryan advocated free silver and thus spoke out against Cleveland's plan to repeal the Sherman Act. Nevertheless, the act was repealed since Cleveland broke all filibusters using his job-granting anti-merit powers. Even with the act repealed, the gold reserve continued to plummet to 41 million. The U.S. was now in danger of having to abandon the gold standard, which could easily then cause rampant inflation. So Cleveland struck a deal with J.P. Morgan, the banker's banker, for a $65 million gold loan, and Cleveland therefore restored confidence in American finance. Now, Frank, could you tell us about the end of Cleveland's presidency?
Absolutely. Unfortunately, it ended on quite the sour note. The public hated the gold bond deal, since they believed it showed collusion between the federal government and big banks. Cleveland also found himself in the limelight for the passage of the Wilson-Gorman tariff, which increased the import tax. Since he had promised to lower the tariff when he came into office, the public now viewed him as untrustworthy. In conclusion, this chapter, though long, was quite important. We saw the beginning of several modern American movements, such as the labor movement, and we also saw the transgression of the most forgettable presidents ever, such as Chester Arthur and Benjamin Harrison. Corruption among government workers was rampant, although laws were evolving to combat this graft. And on the bright side, life for the average American was increasing, and voter turnout was the highest it has ever been, staying steady at around 80% of the population. Thank you for watching. Please make sure to like and subscribe.
And comment down below if you have any questions. We'll catch you guys next time.